Hello, thank you for joining us. This is part 3 of our study on the book of Galatians, and we're working with an article here by I gotta find it here. And it is by Jeff Ziegler, and the title of the article is Why Read the Book of Galatians. And just to recap you, if you're totally new with us, we're doing this because we've all been separated from our churches and we're in charge of leading ourselves. And if you're anyone, like whether you're the Pope himself all the way down to someone who's just somewhat interested in Christianity, the idea of tackling the entire Bible is very daunting, and we don't know where to start. And often we want to read the Bible cover to cover the way you would read a book, but the Bible doesn't necessarily work like that. And so it's like, where do I even begin? And so we're kind of dealing with, so why should you deal with the book of Galatians? And I will be honest, I picked this study because it cuts at stuff that I know I'm working on and struggling on. So if you've been following along with us, you should have read up through Galatians 4. So today is our final one where we're going to deal with chapters 5 through 6. So the cool thing, if you're doing this study with me, is at this point after today, you will have read a book of the Bible, which is really, really great. So that's a good thing to come out of this. So when I read chapters 5 and 6, before getting into this study, there's a lot. And so I'm just going to be honest, I'm not going to do the due diligence that chapters 5 and 6 deserve, because I don't want this to be like a 30-minute video. Just being honest. So I just want to gloss over them, but I want to acknowledge that these are very thick, very full Bible passages that in your own time, when you're reading after watching this video or before watching this video, take the time to really focus on these passages because there's a lot in them. And so you can't not ignore it. So chapter 5 and 6 talk a lot about circumcision. And to just start surface up there, and before you say, wow, this Bible's so outdated, it talks about this, this ancient ritual that some people do, some people don't, but it's no longer a religious thing. You can take this passage and put it into anything that people argue about in church. It's what people argue about in church. And so you don't have to use any stretch of the imagination to picture Christians disagreeing over something. I love Christians, I love Christianity, but what comes when people are passionate about the Bible is they're gonna get mad and they're gonna disagree. The most well-intentioned Christians, even Paul and Barnabas, split ways because it's impossible to agree entirely with someone on the Bible. But Paul is really yelling. He's saying, knock it off with this stuff. It doesn't matter, circumcision and all that. He's saying, all this stuff you argue about in church, it doesn't matter because Jesus is what matters. Jesus is the one who frees us from all this. He talks about slavery. So don't put yourself back into slavery by arguing about certain rituals. You know what I mean? So you can put this again into anything like, I know when I was younger, I don't see it as much now, but you still see it. A lot of churches were arguing about like hymns versus no hymns or organs versus no organs. And Paul would say the same thing, like, stop arguing about this stuff. It's about Jesus. It's about the cross. It's all that good stuff. And also in chapters 5 through 6, you get like a big list of sins, and he's kind of saying like, hey, this is what everybody's facing, all these sins. You get the fruits of the Spirit. I love in chapter 6 as well, at the beginning especially, you get like this really great Bible passage about how to treat people. And it's like, hey, treat each other with forgiveness and with peace and acceptance. So yeah, I feel like I'm giving you really quick synopsis of what happens in chapters 5 and 6. But the main gist of it is it's this whole concept of freedom. So I don't really know what to draw. I guess I'll try and draw a chain. And they're saying, hey, we're all caught up in, he uses it, slavery to sin. And then the concept is that when Jesus died, he destroyed our slavery to sin. So this is no more. But the way human behavior works is we re-put ourselves back into that slavery. And Paul is saying, don't do it. He's saying, knock it off. Focus only on Jesus and the freedom that comes out of Jesus. And then you will experience what it is to be truly free. And I know this video is getting long, but I'm sorry. Like I said, there's just such good stuff in chapters 5 and 6 of Galatians. can't do it without talking about this article. So we've been working through this article that, again, we want to give all the credit. Jeff Ziegler wrote, and so he split Galatians into 3 parts. And we're working with the last part that he split up. And again, I hate to just read it verbatim, but it's so good. And I actually want to encourage you guys, find this article and read it on your own time. So just go to Google and type in "Why Study the Book of Galatians." This crossway.org should be one of the first or second hits on Google for you to read the entire article, because I know I've given you snippets of it, but it's really good. But I want to read what he says verbatim because it's so good, and then I want to unpack it, because this, I think, like, so much of his article is taking just common American culture and Christianity together and looking at how they really don't exist together. And I think that that's just amazing. So here he's talking about freedom. And he says, in our day, freedom is about choices. Essentially, freedom is the ability to do what we want as long as we hurt nobody else. Now me, my generation, I'm a millennial, that kind of thing was drummed into my head all the time by American culture of like, be you, do whatever you want as long as you're not hurting anybody else. And that, again, is another American lie. And he says, tragically, this understanding of freedom is destroying us, for it deprives us of the very things that make us most human and alive. Human wholeness only comes in being faithful to our commitments and principles, in showing sacrificial love towards others, and above all, in worshiping the true God. And yet each of these are seen as contrary to human freedom, for each one of them places constraints on us. That's amazing. And I feel like this analogy is overdone, but it's so relevant in of like the freedom that can come from constraints. And so when I was a kid, I always heard this example is, so think of like Michael Jordan. If somebody would have just handed Michael Jordan a basketball and said, do whatever you want, you're completely free, as long as you don't step on anybody's toes, you're good, he wouldn't have had any fun, right? He wouldn't have understood how basketball works. He wouldn't have risen to be a superstar. He wouldn't have had the freedom that came with that life of being a basketball superstar and a legend. No, someone had to teach him the rules, the mechanics, how to shoot, how to dribble. And inside all of those rules, he became free. And that is Christianity. We like to think, oh, you can't put any limits on us, blah, blah, blah. But inside of limits, you become free. When something is limitless, like if you're just handed a basketball and said, go for it, you're going to entertain yourself for maybe 5 minutes, right? And then you're going to get bored. So I'm going to keep going down, and he says, Galatians offers us a different and far better vision of freedom. Freedom is to be in Christ, a son of the Most High God, rather than being a freedom from, it is a freedom for, which I love how he says that. So it is the freedom to experience the love of God that enables us to cry to him, Abba, Father, the freedom of confidence, knowing that we are heir to all of God's promises, the freedom and the power of the Spirit to serve one another in love. This is a freedom that connects us more deeply to God in every way, and in this we find life. So then he ends here with saying, God's gospel of God's salvation into God-given freedom. I know that's a kind of a run-on sentence. That's the heartbeat of Galatians. In the morning as I wake up very slowly, my antidote to the drowsiness I feel is my first glorious cup of coffee. Galatians is a spiritual cup of coffee, awakening us again to the reality of God in our world and in our lives. That is just, Galatians is a spiritual cup of coffee, awakening us again to the reality of God in our world and in our lives. Because if you remember, if you've been following us along from the beginning, the whole purpose of this study in this article is going against this concept of practical atheism, where a lot of us, we say we love Jesus, and yet we go about our day and Jesus never crosses our mind. Like, that is a huge struggle of mine, if I'm honest. It's like so much of my day, and it's not being malicious, it's not being anti-religious, it's just when I'm at the grocery store, I'm not thinking about Jesus. But like, the Bible talks about how it should be all-consuming, right? And so I love this idea of Galatians being a spiritual cup of coffee to remind us of like, hey, you are free in Christ, but you are in Christ. And that is you are still under that, but when you live in that, you get so much more goodness and fullness in your life. So yeah, I'm seeing that I'm at the 10-minute mark, so I want to cut myself off. But yeah, read Galatians 5 and 6, and please read that article. And thank you for studying along. Drop me a comment, an email, a text of where you want to go next. Like what book of the Bible you guys want to do after this. I'll be honest, I don't know which one I want to pick, but we'll probably do some Old Testament. I like how we've gone Old Testament, New Testament. So probably something like that. But thanks for following along with us, and enjoy the rest of your week.